Hi everyone. Congratulations for breaking to the eliminatory rounds. Can I just quickly confirm that every teams are here? Proposition Bali, are you here and complete? Prop Bali, opposition,
Okay.
opposition Kalimantan Timur, are you here and complete?
Yes, we're here and complete.
Great. Going back to Bali, complete. Bali complete.
Yeah, we're complete. We're complete.
Okay, thank you. So, welcome to the Octofinal round of NSDC 2020. Before starting the round, I'd like to have a quick introduction, both from the judges and the teams, alongside with their speaking orders. Starting from the judges, my name is Shagung. I'll be chairing this round. The other judges, please introduce yourself.
First Olia from DI Yogyakarta.
Joshua Karel Oriento Putra from UI.
Great. Proposition team, could you please introduce yourselves and the speaking orders?
Okay, so for government, first speaker is going to be Dipta, second speaker is going to be Johan, third speaker is going to be Mustafa, and the reply speaker will be Dipta.
Great, thank you. Opposition team, please.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Okay, for opposition, the first speaker is going to be Vanes. The second speaker is going to be Prashanti. The third speaker is going to be Fiona. And the reply speaker is going to be Vanes.
Great, thank you for the introduction. We're going to directly start the round. With the motion, this House believes that the United States should end its no negotiation with terrorist policy. I invite Prime Minister. You're here.
I'm audible?
Yes, you're audible.
I'm gonna set my timer first. Okay. If there is any POI, I prefer you guys to unmute yourself because I'm not gonna be able to see the chat as I'm speaking. Gonna start in 3, 2, 1. The US have dropped so many missiles that are wasted on top the lands of Middle East. And terrorism has never ended in the current status quo. Bloods are being shed on, people are being killed, and there not seem any end in the current status quo regarding the terrorism movement. We say that we need to abandon the no negotiation with terrorist policy, and we want to pursue a better de-radicalization strategy. How? Firstly, we're going to focus on community building, and secondly, we're going to focus on narrative, and I'm going to explain to you in my argument. What is our model in this debate? Firstly, we're going to pursue negotiation, maybe in the UN or at anywhere that is most suitable with these countries, and the US will be as the third perspective of this conflict. At the very least, the US will never gonna antagonize these terrorists in the first place. Secondly, we want to negotiate at least 3 or 5 times until we find a best middle ground for the current status quo. Thirdly, in the worst case scenario, if these terrorist movements still attack us, we want to do a preventive measure for these kind of terrorist movement. We don't want to retaliate. We don't want to attack them because it is enough in the current status quo. Instead, we're gonna cut their weaponry supplies. We're gonna block them from the trades and so on and so forth. We don't think that their action is that valid, right? I'm gonna prove to you two things. Firstly, about the morality. Is U.S. culpable on these terrorist actions, irrespective of the outcome? Secondly, I'm going to talk about the effectivity of negotiation in the current status quo to create a better outcome to better end the terrorist organization. So before I move on to my argument, is there any question? Okay, no. So I'm going to talk about morality. Why the U.S. is culpable, right? Firstly, I'm going to talk about the context. How does terrorists came to be? There are some key distinctive here. Firstly, terrorists came to be because they have a political statement in the very first place. They have a radical stance towards the status quo of its own country. But the problem is their leader, the people in power, do not listen to them. Their protest doesn't work. They don't want to do that, and they distrust the government in the very first place. For example, there are Taliban that actually want to escape oppression in Afghanistan, but they become rebellious in the end of the day. Secondly, terrorists have the desire to conduct terror, right? These governments in the Middle East are actually a strongman leader. So anytime that someone or some group come up with a radical stance or policy, it's going to be seen like something is bad. The government will see them as illegitimate. Not only they lost the rights of the government to represent their beliefs, these very government are labeling them as radical. This action is validating their terrorists in the end of the day. So there will be more blood that is shed in the current status quo. This is a symbolism. These attacks are a symbolism towards the corrupt government and inside the Middle East in the first place. Why is this context important? Terrorists can have a legitimate cause to rebel. They were a rational human being. They are not mindless. But people in power just label them just like that. What does it mean? They will be seen as less human. They only seen as an aggressive animals, for instance, because no, thank you. They are seen as mindless exactly because nobody wants to hear the reason behind their action. Nobody wants to even justify to negotiate in the very first place, ladies and gentlemen. Secondly, why is the U.S. culpable for these reasons? One of the reasons why terrorists are so radical in the very first place is because they want to rage against the West. The U.S. keep intervening the very conflict they shouldn't be a part of in the very first place. The intervention just creates more and more blood. It creates more and more anger. It's just like how ISIS decided to bulldoze Syria and Iraq border because U.S. strengthening their side, right? The intervention of U.S. only escalate the power of one side. That is why the other side will become more and more rebellious. What does it mean? Look, the fact that there is more and more blood, especially when you by the U.S. intervention, U.S. is very blameworthy for the escalation of war that ended up of the long going of conflict in the current status quo. They are the one. These actors, which is the U.S., are the ones who should stop bringing more casualties. This is enough, and we do not see any end to this terrorism issue in this status quo, right? Even if these radical people did horrible things, it doesn't justify how the U.S. will just fight them with fire, right? It doesn't come to an end in the current status quo, because in the status quo they still have reason. Their reasons are very stagnant and very stagnant. The problem is just because we don't listen, and unfortunately, the people in power and us is still labeling them in the very first place. There's no way this terrorism will come to an end. And therefore, the U.S. is very blameworthy for this. Yes.
So if a terrorist is bombing everyone and killing people, would you still label them as a good person and rational?
Can you repeat that? I'm sorry.
So if a terrorist group bombs someone and kills people, would you still label them as rational and have a clear mind?
Okay, firstly, We don't label them as anything. Of course, they do terror. We only label them as terrorists. But we don't label them as, we only label them as people with grievances towards the government, right? We don't label them as the one who is very, very radical that just want to erase the state, for instance. They have reasons. They have reasons that we should hear in the very first place. Just because they conduct terrorists, it doesn't mean we don't have any reason to just listen to them in the end of the day, right? So we don't literally see them as a very good person, as you trying to say, but we are actually seeing them as the people who want to create reasons, who want to be heard in the current government, right? Secondly, I'm going to talk about the effectivity. So how does it look like? If we always torture terrorists, we'll never know the cost of what they did in the end of the day. It is hard to determine whether or not what they think, what is actually inside their head, right? It looks like how you arrest a killer by just shooting them in the head without knowing the cost. You don't give them the rights to express their cost. You don't give them the rights to actually give the reasons to the court which can de-escalate their punishment, for instance. Secondly, it is likely to have a middle ground because these terrorists have a clear goal in the end of the day, and our approach is very peaceful. So we don't see any disaffectivity if we just don't try to negotiate in the middle ground. At the very least, US will not intervene and escalate the war in the current status quo, and we're very proud to propose.
I think the first proposition for the speech to open the case of the opposition team. I'd like to invite the first opposition.
Hello, am I audible? Am I audible? Clear and
Sorry, you are not too clear. You're a bit lagging.
Is this now audible?
Yeah, it's better.
Okay, cool. I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. No negotiation for terrorists comes when terrorists kidnap the group within the Munich Olympiad and want a ransom towards the US. And George Bush say, no, we don't want any negotiation with terrorists. That is what we stand for. We don't want any other attacks in the future, and we don't want any substantial harms towards our society. We are very proud to oppose, right? But before that, several points of clarification. First, on the point of no negotiation with terrorists, it should be a negotiation of ransom and hostage to begin with. Or even if they want a caliphate country, we're going to still prove to you why that's bad. Second, their first speaker, whole substantive, is basically to say that US are portraying them as bad guys because they say terrorists are rational and clear mind. But then when they answer RPI by saying that, oh, USA does not portray them as bad guys, this proves to you that their particular characterization in which they put their case on footnote stand. But before that, on the point 13, on the point of model, their model of having a community center and other giving aid to the particular government that exists in the particular already exists under both sets of laws. I don't see how that is exclusive only under your side. 14. On the point of blame, on the particular rebuttal, their whole case told you that USA is blameworthy. But look, by the logic of their case, if they told you that terrorist is not wrong because they are representing their grievances and their ideology, if you play also that by logic, the reason why USA intervened within the Middle East in the first place is because USA opt-in into that ideology of no authoritarian country within the first place, a Western liberal democracy where everyone can vote out their South. That is why USA intervened within the Middle East in the first place. So if they want to say that USA is culpable, but also by their logic, USA is not culpable in the first place, therefore I don't know what their case is. They don't have any case. But with that in mind, several points. First, under the stance, we will prosecute terrorists within the lens of USA, reverse terrorists within the Middle East or African continent, like ISIS, Taliban, Tamil, and etc. This UK also will not give any ransom money on giving a hostage. Second, on the metric of success, we provide a work in which we can combat terrorism at the end of the day. But before I go in my arguments.
Okay, cool. If terrorists have reasonable demands for negotiation, i.e. give them jobs or repatriation, would you still deny their demands?
I don't think terrorists want that in the first place because that particular thing already exists. Terrorists within the Iranian country already, Iranian government already give them job. We already give Iraqi government a ransom when we installed a new liberal government within the first place. I don't think that's what they want. They want money and they want weapons, and Kalimantan country will explain it under my argument. Two things about under this debate. First, how it only will fuel more terrorism. Second, how it will harm USA as a global power. First, how it will fuel more terrorism. The premise within this argument is that they drew atrocities from nation to nation in first place. What does this look like? This looks like saying, look, kidnapping people, do bombing, and other kind of thing. Not within the Middle East itself. Middle East is their base. They never attack the particular Middle East. But what they attack is a Western country, so that their voice of wanting a new country could be fought in the first place. But what is the incentive of terrorists? Note that the radicalization that happening in the Middle East and why people opting into terrorist group, why people want to fly to that particular country, Indonesia, people fly to Middle East to the first place, it's not because they lack power or they lack money in the first place, but because they want to make a country free from any liberalization, free from any Western grip in the first place. Country is filled with authoritarian regime in the first place. But the reason why USA should not do this is because it's not in line with the crux of USA ideology. What is it? US is because USA relies on democracy at this crux of ideology. So on the base of moral high ground, we say that we stay toward ideology. It means that under your set of laws, you're abandoning your ideology of what Western liberal democracy should be upheld by the particularly USA in the first place. But second, also on the fact that it will weaken USA bargaining power and country as a superpower in the international world when you bow to this terrorist group and cater to them in the end of the day. When you legitimize their particular violence, that is when you are not within your moral high ground, and is when USA will lose face within the international world. But second reason, you strengthen the bargaining power of terrorists. Wait. The terrorists operates in a way that who can gain much more crime, who can do much more crime and gain more support, such as hostage and shooting. But the reason you strengthen them is when you negotiate with them to free your people. When you comply to them, that is when they will feel legitimized. But what is the harm of this? The harm of this comes when they kidnap your people and they want ransom. Why so? Because it's the only way you can comply to them, and that's the way that they can gain money to then further excavate and try to annex the place beside them, such as Syria, or even attack other country to make their particular new country. But why is that harmful? First, it creates a far bigger disturbance within the society. If they want to talk about society, we say that we opt in and get a society benefit much more. Why? When the terrorist has the incentive to create problems in society, this is harmful because we believe that on both sides, sure, people will be victim, but under our side, hostage may die in the first time, but after that they will see it as useless. Why? Because USA don't want to negotiate with them. What happened under their side? More people will be kidnapped and killed on the some point where you are out of ransom, or when you out of money, or when the ransom goes too far. But by that point of time, it's still harmful for two reasons. First, because they are already so powerful in first place. Because you already supply them with money, it means that they can buy weapons, arms, drone to further exacerbate their attack and make attacks within the Middle East and attack their neighboring country, their neighboring area, and cause more victim in the end of the day. If you don't want bloodshed that up for under our side, because bloodshed will only happen when they open into war, and they will not stop that far and that particular point. Second, they will escalate their violence step by step because they know that you'll cater to them anyway. It means that more and more people will be hostage by then, and more people will be killed if you don't want to stop. But then second, because that all groups will try to do the same. What does this look like? This looks like not just one terrorist group try to do so, but all terrorist groups all around the world, when they want something that is not within the Western liberal democracy, they also see this as a working way. This is when all groups try to try to kidnapping and hostage. That is when the harm that contributed toward the society is far more exacerbated under opposing set of thus under opposing set of thus. This is why this particular argument is important. But then second, it delegitimize USA power as a global power. The premise of this argument is that simply by USA are the one of the head member of NATO to counter Russia, to support Israel to combat Middle East combatant. Why so? Because it's USA job as a global superpower by the virtue of they will put war and their particular supporting ideology, but also to combat the unrest within the society. But why is that harmful towards USA image? It's because first, it encourages other particular bigger regime to do so. Not only in a minor scale where terrorists will create unrest within the society, but what it will do, it will encourage Russia, it will encourage China to do far more human rights issues in the first place. That is what USA should not opt into the particular reason in the first place. Because what this particular country do when they see when a smaller group succeed, then they will not say, do the particular thing. They will keep oppressing their people. Or Russia will keep annexing Georgia and Crimea, or to the point of annexing the whole Ukraine as all, which is not in line with what is liberal democracy and of freedom of work. But then second thing is that USA will lose its legitimacy. Why so? When you bow to the particular terrorists, when you bow to the particular terrorists, that is when you lose your global superpower. Because why? Because if you, as a protector of this world, you comply to that people, it means that you have less legitimacy and less power, and it proves to you that those particular group has far more better bargaining power to you, that so big that you bow to them in any day. But the harm of this is that when that particular country or country that feels protected by USA is not feeling protected anymore when USA opted into this terrorist group feeling in the first place. But second speaker will prove out to you why it's harmful, and then they are out of time. For all that is the proud purpose.
I think the first opposition for the speech to continue the case of the proposition team, I'd like to invite the second proposition.
Okay. I would rather my POI through unmuting yourself. Okay. It seems like opposition thinks that the only terrorist organizations existing are terrorist organizations that are so radical and are not amenable for any negotiation like ISIS. I have a couple of bad news for them, that terrorist organizations exist in a vast spectrum. There are nationalist terrorist groups like Boko Haram, for instance, in Nigeria, and US would also say that Hamas is terrorist, is also another terrorist group. And we argue to you, if US, Israel, and Hamas sat down on the table, negotiated, and concedes a land to Palestine, I assure you Hamas will stop, right? So what opposition needed to prove here was why negotiations with these other terrorist groups, other than the most radical ones, were infeasible. I want to make one thing very clear, that our stance is to negotiate with terrorists, so we're not going to attack them unlike their side of the house. So they questioned, right? What if these terrorists constantly attack us? We were very clear since PM. We told you that we're going to passively disarm them, cut distribution of logistics, for instance, so we don't have to kill them like this very draconian world on their side of the house. So the comparative is that under government, the US is going to be less hawkish and less interventionist, and on opposition, they're going to annihilate them with erratic carpet bombings on their side of the house. The problem I also noticed with their case, their LO case, is that they spent minutes of telling you the harms of letting these terrorist groups win. What they needed to prove was the counterfactual world. Why then attacking these terrorists over and over again will solve all of these problems? Because what we're trying to prove here is to prove why then prove why the negotiation will solve all of the harms that they want to claim. They need to engage with the core before that. Yes.
We're not attacking them either. We're just not negotiating with them.
Well, you have to, okay, that's just a soft mechanism, right? Then all of the harms that you talk about will still exist under your side of the house as well if you don't do anything. This is a funny case from Kaltim, right? So before that, several clarifications in my speech, several extraneous rebuttals in my speech. So LO comes up here and POIs, oh, so you're going to label, whoever coming from Kaltim tried to use this POI, right? You're going to label them as a good person, right? Okay, so this statement misses the nuance. We're saying that their actions are immoral, but we don't condone their actions, but we say the root cause of their actions is a legitimate root cause. So this is clear that we don't support what they do, but we're trying to, appease to them, for instance. So the next argument coming from their side of the house was that, okay, so this harms US's standing. There are three responses to this argument. First of all, really guys, USA has done a lot of atrocious things and nobody cares. Furthermore, USA is culpable. This is the HBT debate, so we don't need to care about USA's global standing. But secondly, even if even if this was true, right? I'm pretty sure countries and optics around the world have become more progressive and they're more supportive towards negotiation. But lastly, they told you USA's hegemony is so good. This was an assertion. Because what they tell you is essentially why if people gravitate to Russia or gravitate to China, oh guys, Russia annexes Crimea, China has Uyghur. Guys, if this was about throwing examples, USA was one of the pioneer of black segregation. They still disenfranchise black people, so we don't see why this is a good comparison. If you want a debate about whether China's hegemony is better than USA's hegemony, that's another debate that can't be solved by like 2 lines of assertion. But then I'm going to move on to my, okay, so what they tell you here on the account of culpability by the US was that to say that US intention is nice. What they wanted was everyone to liberalize and democratize, become Western liberal democracies like US likes. So this is another like liberal propaganda. Like I'm just not sure why why USA is not culpable, even if like not every country believes that being liberal is the way to go, for instance, or being a democracy is the way to go, for instance. So I don't think this is that should stand. My arguments then, there are 2 extensions here. Firstly, on the moral principle, I'm going to add several things. Are terrorists fully culpable? Do they deserve this nonstop attack from USA? I just want to note that the counterfactual on their side of the house is that they're going to constantly attack and carpet bomb these groups. Why is this morally abhorrent? There are several points, 4 points here. Firstly, birth lottery, byproduct of circumstances. Most terrorist organizations recruit their members from poor communities because these people needed money to survive in this capitalistic world, conflated with the evil nature of birth lottery. So often these things are beyond their control, like being born in an overly conservative environment, having overly conservative parents, or even not having a moderate religious leaders because you're unlucky. That's why they shouldn't be culpable and they shouldn't kill them under their side of the house. Secondly, I'm willing to go beyond this and say that free will doesn't really exist, right? I posit that individuals can't control their free will and that it's controlled by the neurons in their brain. This means they're not culpable. Thirdly then, to make this point stronger, USA is single-handedly the most culpable country to talk about. Why? The creation of terrorist groups in Middle East was because USA had to impose its white saviorism towards everyone. There are 3 reasons here. First, the escalation of conflict, because USA keeps putting oil to the fire because they wanted war to continue so that these countries can buy more arms and guns. Secondly, they wanted to perpetuate the escalation so that they can have a conflict, so that they can police the world and fulfill their role as a white savior. Thirdly, then, USA continuously fearmongers the global citizen by saying that terrorists are scums to the society. But lastly then, I just want to posit out that the rise of terrorist groups, often it's not always, don't always come from the fact that they were oppressed. The grievances were taken with ease. Oftentimes it's because their grievances were taken with ease that they needed reparation. The Kurdistans are angry because their land was severely annexed by Turkey. Hamas is angry because Hamas is angry because Israel is negligent. This means that they have actual demand. The key takeaway from this argument is that terrorists are humans, unlike how opposition is saying that these terrorists are animals and deserve to die. Secondly then, is the negotiation feasible? I just want to point out the types of terrorists we're talking about. We're not only talking about ISIS, we're talking about Hamas, like what USA thinks is a terrorist, or PKK and the Kurds are considered as terrorist groups as well. Why is this our approach to negotiation will be successful? There are several reasons here. Firstly, these terrorists often have a clear goal. Palestine's Hamas wanted a parcel of land. Kurds want a parcel of land from Turkey. Secondly, these terrorists have no incentive to keep dying and continue the war and continue fighting after they get what they negotiated for. For instance, given they have like houses, given they have goals, and often come from poor social economic background. But thirdly, then we told you this was important because at least we get them to the negotiation table. We stop killing their children, laughing at their grievances under our side of the house. With a consistent benevolence to terrorists, they're going to think USA is more amenable to change. But lastly, we give them diplomatic immunity as well. That's why they're likely to come. Secondly, then, can US fulfill demands? I think US is rich, they have a lot of resources, but secondly, terrorists won't demand like an entire control of a country. Just give them livelihoods, give them proper life. That's how you fix the problem. But lastly, then, if they wanted to argue with the most radical and like the most radical of terrorists, I think it's not that hard. Okay, the theory that you hear, the popular narrative that you hear that terrorists cannot be like put back in the society is a myth, right? it's not even that hard to do like community building, establish a community which they can feel like they're humans, feel like they're one with other people, feel like they're not different from other people. So even in the most radical cases, we can still change those people. For all of those reasons, we're so proud to propose.
Okay, thank you for the speech. To continue the case from the opposition team, I'd like to invite the second opposition.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Okay. Because my laptop lags when I open my camera, I will not open it. But my POI preference is just unmute your mic and say POI. With that being said, I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Judges, notice that this is a debate, a value judgment debate. That is to say, all of their analysis about how good terrorist is, about how unlucky terrorist is, doesn't matter at all at the moment where you're not able to prove to me why then your importance of being a Khalifa country or negotiating with people like terrorists is much more important than freeing the value of Western liberal democracy. This is why you stand with Kalimantan Timur. Before I'm going to ask the questions I'm going to talk about in my speech, one point of clarification, because it seems that Bali is confused about what we're going to do in the status quo. So what are we going to do in this debate? We are going to attack them, yes, but we are only going to attack them when they do attacks to our country. So we think that is the reason, or the sole reason, and the consequences on why on terrorists when they do bad stuff to us, for example. But further than that, we're not going to do negotiation. For example, we're going to give them weapons or money, unlike what proposition is going to do, right? With that being said, in my clarification, I'm going to ask 3 questions in my speech. Firstly, is USA culpable or not? Secondly, why Western liberal democracy is much more important than negotiating? But thirdly, I'm going to explain to you what is actually the incentive of terrorists. Why then on their side of the house, their characterization could never stand. But lastly, I'm going to stand about protection. Why under our side of the house we protect our people better. So first question, is USA capable or not, right? What did they give to you in this debate? They say, oh, they're born in a country where in the Middle East, they are so unlucky and unprivileged and they do not have a good leader in their region, for example, right? Notice that this is not an analysis that can then prove to you why USA is culpable. Because if they're born in the Middle East, that is not the fault of Trump or whoever is in USA. That is just birth lottery to begin with. But secondly, though, even if it is cause of birth lottery, we still think that is not an analysis that is going to properly answer why they attack people in the very first place, why they bomb places, for example, in order for them to have their lands back, like what the second speaker said, right? But then also they say, oh, the way for us to actually cope with this this terrorists is by establishing community building, and they say, oh, it is so easy. Then by the logic of their own side of the house, if it is easy, why didn't they bomb people? Why didn't they kill people? If it is really easy for us to stop up, we don't think that we're going to apply such policies to begin with. I don't think that the analysis they actually give matters in this debate, right? But why under all of the house we answered this question? We say USA is not culpable. The reason why they do this policy is exactly to protect our people, is not to acknowledge their existence in the diplomatic sphere. This is why my first speaker argument matters, right? Because we told you in the very first place why it is going to be harmful. Why we are someone who a lot of countries are looked up to, because we are literally superpowers. That is to say, the moment where we are going to back down into terrorists, what we do is that we're not going to be better for USA, for example, but instead giving what they want in the very first place. Moreover, the characterization that they give to you is say, oh, terrorist is not only one person who only want Palestine, but it also exists in spectrum. Exactly. This means that the demand of a terrorist is very arbitrary. That is to say, you cannot just came to me, oh, if we're going to give them the land, they're going to stop. We think that they also want weapons to kill more people. They also want money to supply their regulation of how they buy their weapons and how in the future they're going to make even more plans, for example. So we think that USA is not culpable at all, but instead we are doing what we can do to protect our country. This is why we do no negotiation with the terrorist policy. But second question, why Western liberal democracy is much more important than negotiating? What did they give to you in this debate? They say basically there is no engagement at all through Fanis's argument, right? But what we say to you in this debate is exactly because we don't want other countries to also opt into this. It's because you don't want to back down to them. And we think that this is the reason why then, under your side of the house, it is going to be much worse. We think that the reason why also this terrorist is going to do this is because they hate Western, right? They do anti-Western, so that in order for them, when they are able to make the biggest country back down to them, that is moment they're going to do even more alliance and even more terrorism to begin with, right? So we think that this is why Western liberal democracy is much more important, because they were not suffering and we are not going to back down into terrorists to begin with. Imagine if USA is backing down to them, and then not only, for example, Al Qaeda or even ISIS, but even more and more people who use violence is going to only use violence in order for them to get their demand. What we think is important for you in this debate is to protect your people, is to never acknowledge their existence. This is why Western liberal democracy exists. It is to preemptive what they're going to do in the future. For example, it is to also solve what they're going to do after they're going, for example, do ransoms or kidnap people. This is why we think Western liberal democracy is much more important. But before that, yes.
So you think Western liberal democracies are so good? Would you allow like USA to conquer half of Africa because they're not Western liberal democracies?
It is already explained by my first speaker. Africa doesn't have anything to do in this debate. While we're not trying to conquer everything in the world. What we're trying to do is to protect our country, right? Moving on, that I gave no sense. But lastly though, incentive of terrorists. This is where I explain to you why under the side of the house, even in their best case scenario, where they are going to shut Hamas down while giving them Palestine, for example, is never going to work. Because the motive of terrorists is not only to get lands, but also to take down the government, right? If it is true that their only motive is to have lands, we don't think that they're going to do such violent movements, because I think that in the current status quo, not only USA are having terrorists, right? That is to say, also other countries also have terrorism. If we think that this is the exact reason why then the exact reason then why terrorists wants, because when they are able to achieve smallest things, for example, when they're able to get their demand in the very first place, that is the moment where they're going to ask more and more. And because they see, oh, the way I'm going to get this demand is by kidnapping people, that is the only way also they're going to use violence to get what they want in the very first place, right? So we think that the incentive of terrorists is not only to get lands, but also to take over the government. As long as the government is not begging down to them into their knees, they're never going to stop. But I'm going to further extend our protection, right? We think that the reason why under our side of the house is so far ahead is because exactly what is going to happen under your side of the house is a trickle down effect where you lose your allies to begin with. The reason why other countries allies with US is exactly to have protection and better military supplies, right? So the moment where US is going to make a room for terrorists, that is the moment where people will most likely not up into allying with USA. We think that this is the reason also why under your side of the house, not only that you're going to get a massive harm by allowing terrorists to exist and to bargain with you, but also you're losing your image as a superpower country where you are seen as so strong, but then you're begging down to them just because they want a land. And also what they do is by doing violence, right? So by that being not justified at all, because I'm pretty sure no one here wants to be killed by terrorists, but the future that you're begging down on them by doing some by the future that you're begging down on them with a violence, we don't think that that is going to be good for your country or even into another country. This is why my first speaker analysis matters in the very first place. So what did I approve to you in my speech? I proved to you firstly that USA is not culpable at all, and all of your analysis about how pure terrorist is not true at all. Because we think that if that is true, they will never bomb people or they will never kill people. But secondly, I explained to you why Western liberal democracy is much more important than negotiating people who is not justified in the very first place. But lastly, I explained to you the incentive of terrorists. I don't think they will be satisfied anyway. They will keep killing people because you are in the first place legitimize their killing as a way to get things. Then they will keep killing if their demand isn't satisfied, which is kind of like North Korea do. But okay, proud to oppose.
I thank the second opposition for the speech. To continue the case of the proposition team, I'd like to invite the third proposition.
Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
I'm grabbing my timer now. I prefer for POIs for you guys to unmute yourselves. because I won't be able to read the chat. Okay, then I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Just a point of clarification, we're not legitimizing their action. We're saying that the root of the problem might not, considering the root of the problem, this bombing might not be the most justifiable action to take in order to mitigate the problem. And we so proud to propose. So there are 3 clashes in today's debate. The first one is, will this solve the problem? And secondly, which side gains benefit? Which side in terms of, whether or not this is terrorist or is it the country, for example. And thirdly, is the USA a legitimate actor to protect? So the first of all, I would like to get into the first questions, which is which will this solve the problem? Because I've noticed that they told you that by killing people, constantly, by for example, by raiding their home, their houses, with this no negotiation policy, it would solve the problem by for example, getting rid of the terrorists. I don't believe that is the case, because we tell you that it only perpetuates the problem. It only creates a chain in which that people will have to kill themselves, keep killing in order to be satisfied at. Because if you kill one member of a terrorist family, then they will bring more, and they will do retaliation attacks. And if you don't listen to them, at the end of the day, the only thing you would get out of them is basically a harder stance towards negotiation, which you finally realize that you do need. We believe that it's an important thing it's important thing to realize that terrorists is not entirely illogical, as they're not, to the point that they are not willing to listen, especially when they're cornered, especially when they're lacking supplies. I think there's still a side of the terrorists which is as rational as, for example, receiving supplies. We believe that terrorists are rational in our side of the house, which is the first subset of this question. Is terrorists rational or not? We told you that terrorists are rational because they are, for example, people that are desperate, and they are the victims of the U.S. expansionist policies, right? Because first of all, if the U.S. never interfered with the policy in the first place, then terrorists wouldn't happen. They wouldn't have to lose their homes. They wouldn't have to lose their families. They wouldn't have to be put into a desperate situation where the only way they could live is to join a terrorist group. I believe that it is a part of the U.S. culpability, that that the U.S. has caused all these terrorist chains. We believe that they are a rational actor because first of all, they need supplies, and they will be listening to us, because we believe that. Because we believe that at the end of the day, they won't ask more, and they will listen to what they get, even if they ask more. So, okay, several responses to this, right? They told you that the terrorists will ask more, and at the end of the day, they will not be satisfied to what they get. I don't think they're in a position to bargain that much, right? Because when you see a terrorist group which is basically cornered, lacking supplies, with all our prevention measures like blocking supply chains and such, I don't think they'll be asking for more. They're asking for what they get, because our entire prevention model is basically preventing them from asking more. They won't ask more at the point in which that they are cornered. I don't believe that this is a likely scenario on our side of the house. So, into the second clashes, which side actually gains benefit? We believe that our side gets but more benefit because we end the chains of violence. They claim that it would end the chains of violence because basically we get rid of the terrorists, and just that. We believe that we gain more benefit if we listen to these terrorists. If we, for example, propose a different way of approaching the problem to the point where they'll basically maybe realize their mistakes, or for example, and I think the other side would gain benefit because less people are getting killed, by desperate terrorists looking for food and such things. We believe that at the end of the day, our side gains more benefit. So I like to get straight into the bigger clashes today, which is the U.S. a culpable actor? Is the U.S. the right actor to defend? They've defended the basic Western values of liberal democracy, right? There's a justification. No, that this is not an actual debate, meaning that they were looking for a third perspective, in which you don't have to defend Western liberal values, because if by defending Western liberal values you mean by, for example, by doing a coup d'état in Iran, replacing the monarchical leader with an even more radical leader, is defending Western democracy, then you go on. It is a very hard thing to defend. I don't think they've failed. I don't think they've been succeeded in defending this in the first place, because we tell you that the U.S. has causes this destabilization in the first place. We believe that we allow U.S. to label these groups as terrorists, and the only thing that we get is basically the US labeling everyone as a terrorist and gaining more political leverage and more political benefits towards that. Because we believe that there are other exceptions to the terrorist labels that the US trying to put, which is, for example, the Hamas. What about the other victims? The Antifa, they're even calling the Antifa terrorists now. Because we believe that this is a political agenda made by the US in order to which they would be able to gain more political freedom and more, for example, ground in the political area. We believe that it's far more important to defend to basically to basically to basically defend and defend the United States, and we believe that it would not defend the United States, but rather mitigate the damage to the point where the terrorists won't be able to basically prolong the chain of violence that we told you about. We tell you that it won't end the violence because the violence already happened, and the only way that you end the violence is through negotiation. We believe that by listening to them, we'd be at least you have to accept the fact that we will be able to mitigate the damage because by mitigating the damage, we will prevent further deaths, like I've told you about. So they continue the fighting would only cause us violence, right? I think I believe that it's clear, and I've been repeating that for so long now. So why is it more important to defend the Western? If we want to talk about an actual debate, why is it more important to maintain the good image of the United States rather than the Western values of democracy they champion about? I believe that the U.S. is not currently labeled as a country in which causes destabilization in the Middle East, right? They're basically labeled as a country in which that only wants to intervene in the Middle East for oils. I do believe that there's a need to change in this because we believe that it is more likely U.S. would get a good image out of basically defending and basically negotiating with these terrorists rather than they would if they keep bombing the settlements and keep stealing Palestinian lands, right? I believe it is a more likely scenario, and a scenario in which they would get the U.S. a better name if that is their goal. So what is our worst case scenario? Our worst case scenario would be that they will retaliate, and at the end of the day, we will be able to handle that. We will keep negotiating 5 times in order to basically not repeat the same mistake, which is basically perpetuating the violence, and in which that basically creates more terrorists out of people. I don't think that it is wise for them to basically letting the terror, attacking the terrorists without taking into further consideration. I believe that analysis counts as well. We need to understand here that the terrorist is a vulnerable actor. No matter how much they try to tell you that we are basically telling that the terrorists are pure creatures, we do not tell so. We're completely condemning the action. We're not legitimizing the action, but I don't believe it is justifiable for you to basically bomb their houses and take everything away from them without looking at the source of the problem. We believe that the birth authority had a play in this because we know that they're a responsible. They're basically an actor in which there could be that has free will, and an actor in which would be a listen to us because they're put in a desperate situation. So yeah, even compared with their worst case scenario, our scenario would be better. Or their worst case scenario, which is basically the terrorists, the chain of violence will keep going, and their best case scenario is basically the U.S. get a good name because we keep killing more terrorists, right? We believe that we want another comparison as well. Thank you.
I think the third proposition for the speech to conclude the case of the opposition team, I'd like to invite the third opposition.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Okay, thank you. I'm gonna set up my timer for a second. All right. So I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. People in Saudi Arabia has no problems with the intervention with the US because they're able to benefit each other. US gets oil, Saudi gets money. Women in Saudi even benefit from the West liberality for feminism. The reason they're terrorism in the first place because of only one person had a problem with people with different culture and is salty about it. Shout out to Osama. This debate is about how you best stop terrorism, and side proposition definitely failed to do it. I'm going to talk about two main things in my speech, right? Firstly, on which side of the house mitigates casualties. Second, on why under our side we can still maintain the position that the US have currently. Now, before getting into my clashes, I'm going to give you some independent rebuttals towards side proposition, right? So they tried to tell us on that UN, actually that UN already have tried to bring Israel, Hamas, and Fatah within a table and giving splitted land within West Bank. But apparently Hamas don't want to and only want an authoritarian country free from Western. So I don't see why they can suddenly easily give in, right? So then by the proposition logic, then if you comply to terrorism, it means that you give Hamas land, you give Kurds land, but by the basis of how terrorism exists is due to grievances. Look, grievances is two-sided. It means when you give Hamas land, what it will does, it's making a grievance towards other actors beside Hamas. It will create an Israel terrorist or create another group of terrorists. That means your side doesn't solve any problem at all. Terrorists will still exist under your side than in a far larger scale when the majority of country that trusts you become upset with you. That is when more uprising happens, because there can be never peace by the fact that resources is scarce in the first place. Even if USA makes themselves poor to give it to their demand, I don't think they will be satisfied anyway. They will keep killing people because you in the first place legitimize killing as a way to get things. Then they will keep killing if their demand is not satisfied, right? Even if also you can satisfy one group of people, you'll most likely still cannot satisfy and cater to other groups in the center though. So under their side, they cannot win this debate at all, right? So that's out of the way. No, thank you. I'm going to get into my first clash from my speech, right? On which let the House mitigate casualties. They tried to say that, oh, we could just give them proper lights and this will like solve anything. They would back up and not stop terrorizing. My second speaker have told you, it is not the US obligation to cater their lives. It's just birth lottery. It's not our responsibility to cater someone who far off lives somewhere else, right? I think side proposition is also confused of what really a terrorist is. They go around and terror people. Under your side of the house, these terrorists are going to keep terrorizing you, killing and bombing innocent people. Obviously, casualties are worse on your side of the house, especially when you satisfy their demands, like I was said before, you furthermore fuel them. This is not how you end violence, Mr. Third Speaker. They will take what they get and invest it more and do such more plans, like how my second speaker mentioned, and will obviously ask you for more and do much more casualties. But okay, we'll take their best case, where under their side, they have better discourse and negotiate 3 to 5 times. That's the exact word that they say during that time, right? The delay is so long. So many innocent people have already been harmed because they keep killing and bombing those people. And now you want to give them land without considering the innocent people who are going to lose their homes there. Victims of terrorism are way more vulnerable than these terrorists who are living a bad life in Middle East. Yes, okay, then what?
Okay, cool. So if your case was that USA shouldn't be responsible for anything, that including solving terrorism, why would there be any change under your side of the house if the USA doesn't do anything?
We don't do anything. We do actually prevent all of this. We have a policy and you don't. Under our side, this is a preemptive policy. Thank you for asking. I was about to explain this. Those terrorists would know even how many hundreds of people they want to hold hostage. They would still want to do they still want to do it because they know they're not going to get anything, right? So like, for example, if Al-Qaeda are going to think about, oh, I'm going to take 50 hostages and demand something, something, right? Under our side, we never negotiate them. We ignore them, meaning that they will actually make them give up on terrorizing us, right? So under our side of the house, we prevent them. And how I said before, that we will, if side proposition is concerned about casualties, we are actually preventing them by attacking them back, and they cannot get into the forces right inside of our country. Right? That's out of the way. Let's get into the second clash in my speech on why under our side, we can still maintain the position that the US have. This is something that side proposition has not engaged at all, right? They've been talking about only terrorists, and nothing interests of the US. Let's take a look at what side proposition will look like. Right? When you negotiate with terrorists is when you surrender. As the US, then why is that a big concern under our side? My second speaker mentioned this will create a trickle-down effect. When the US, as a superpower country that has so many countries relying on them for protection, especially NATO, they're going to be afraid when you see, oh my God, US that is going to protect me is now surrendering. No, all of these terrorists are going to make us die too. This will make the ties with US, with other of the allies gone. This is a lose and big harm on side proposition. But then what does our world look like? When we don't negotiate with them is where we decrease their power as a diplomatic entity. We say in the first place, terrorism is not bad. They concede themselves that they have an ideology to push towards us, right? We as the US are not terrorizing the Middle East to get the Western liberality. We're just there. But Osama bin Laden is upset and salty. So he decided to attack us. He wants to turn us into a Muslim and non-liberal West country, right? No, this is why this is their biggest harm on their side of the house. They have no given us any positive case, which if there is any, we have all tackled them down. We're saying that none of them work. But under our side of the house, we're able to protect so many actors in this debate. We're able to protect the allies of the US itself, and even those people who are innocent. We see if under our policy, we can actually stop. We can actually prevent any terrorism. So we're actually also protecting those people who want to go to terrorism in a way, right? Because they're going to get harm in the first place. We say nothing is going to be justified if you're doing it violence. If you're doing it violence when we have no obligation to fulfill to do so. Under side opposition, we say terrorists will always be terrorists, and we'll always side with the people who are in the right way. Very proud to post. Thank you.
I thank the third opposition for the speech. To wrap up the case of the opposition team, I'd like to invite the reply speaker from the opposition team.
Hello, I'm audible. Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Cool. I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. The reason why proposition loses the debate is mainly because they make a round-losing contradiction from the inside. First speaker said that they are in those particular terrorists are in a desperate situation. And then the third speaker said that we also condemn the action that is being made by terrorism, and also by the first speaker taking RPOI. So the reason why they lose is because if you take characterization 1, that means that you opt into our case about justifying the killing that is being made toward the civilian. But if you accept characterization 2, it means that you destroy the moral principle of proposition of how terrorists are the one that we should cater. Terrorists are the group that we should cater to, and the most vulnerable in the end of the day. They lost this debate on both sides of the dust. But with that in mind, 2 things under this debate. First is that which side of us are able to rake down terrorism. Second, which side is more vulnerable, the innocent civilian or the terrorist that kills the civilian, right? First thing, which side of us are able to rake down civilian? We stay in we already told you in our stance, we stay in the current status quo. To make this clear, we are not giving them any ransom or any money with what they do in the current status quo. We stick in the current status quo. They're attacking the particular terrorism if they attack us, because that is when they have the label of the particular terrorism. But what they give you, they tell you that USA up in intervening country. But we already told you that USA. But they told you that USA destroy people life by straw manning or argument. We already told you that USA destroys an authoritarian regime that exists in the first place. Those same group that is killing the innocent people that they want to protect in the first place. But what did we bring to you? We bring you first. We don't accept this particular terrorist group into accepting those hostage and turning those hostage into easy money in the first place. But second, even if they do, that means that you are legitimizing their killing. In the end of the day, proves that how their particular argument cannot stand. But what did they give to you? First, about the moral hazard and the moral principle that is being brought by second speaker. I don't think that moral hazard and moral principle should be taken into account under this debate, because this is a debate about how we could better solve terrorism in the end of the day, and not about how our terrorists are most likely unjustifiedly born in the end of the day. But even if they are unjustified born, that doesn't mean that you could justify them killing and people. That means that under our case, or under their status, and within their moral principle is also the same as killing people in the end of the day. Like just to prove to you on how under our settlements we are able to break down terrorism when we bottleneck their particular resources to gain in the end of the day, they need to find another way and even abandon their target. Right? But second, is the victim of terrorism more vulnerable or the terrorist? They literally give you mechanization of how we are up into 3 into 5 time. But notice, first speaker I told you, by the particular gap time existing within those interventions, they are most likely force you to quicken that particular intervention. But what does this mean? It already explained by in the leader of opposition speech. What will it do? It is when they kidnap far more and more people to satisfy their meaning in the end of the day. It will create a far bigger disturbance in the society. We see that the society is one that we should protect in the end of the day because the terrorists have the incentive to create problem within the society. But the reason I already told you that the reason this is harmful is because sure, both sides we already even weighed up the harms that is being get. The harm that under our side is that hostage may die because, but then they will see it as useless. But what they get under your side is when those terrorist groups see kidnapping people as a whole, kidnapping people as the only way, trying to kill people and to bomb and to shoot people in the streets of Detroit, proves that it could give them an easy money in the end of the day. That is when it's particularly harmful. But then they told you that, oh, they will shut up if you give them an easy money. Second and third speaker already break this down when we told you that if they content to get such easy money, that there is no way that they will fly from Indonesia towards the Middle East or even ignoring the particular government that already give them carrying in the particular status quo, right? But then the reason why this happens is because he already told you if they don't want bloodshed in the end of the day, then our side opt in into no bloodshed in the day because we don't give them weapons to kill people, we don't give them resources to wage war on another country that they want independence. We protect innocent civilians and they don't. We are so proud to oppose.
Okay, I thank the reply speaker from the opposition team. To wrap up the case of the proposition team as well as the entire debate, I'd like to invite the reply speaker from
I'm audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay. Gonna start my speech in 3, 2, 1. The problem in their case is that they say negotiation doesn't work and that it makes terrorist organization bigger. But the problem is currently USA's anti-negotiation, you still get no solvency under their side of the house. Opposition's case was a fallen case. They have never proven to you why aggressivity will actually solve the problem in the end of the day. The fact that the status quo doesn't work, the fact that millions and billions of dollars have been scattered because of our action as a global savior in the first place, right? We say that these actions is not working at all. They only waste too much blood and effort with not any end. We do not legitimize any killing in our side of the house. That is why we want a peaceful approach, right? That is why we want to stop dropping bombs in the end of the day. Note that this is not an actor debate. We act like a third perspective here. We do not act as the US. Even if the global hegemony, their global hegemony will be threatened, firstly, it's already happening in the status quo because US is acting as a global savior, but they are still killing people. Secondly, we do not care. We don't have any burden to defend US in this debate. All their arguments is actually legitimate by that case, right? But let's just engage to them, right? Two strategic mistakes in this debate, in their case. They say they will not have any attack or even negotiation. They will just ignore the existence of terrorism. How then their side of the house can stop terrorism in the end of the day if there is no response or preventive measure in the end of the day? But the third speaker said, oh, there will be attacks. But firstly, it is really, really late. And secondly, no justification from their side of the house. Why attacking these terrorists will create better outcome, right? How can there be any solution then in the end of the day? Secondly, their counterfactual world is really funny. They stated that the US is actually there to establish Western liberal democracy. We've told you, geographically, these countries do not have interest to simply change their ideology in the middle of a war, right? There's no likelihood from their side of the house. That's why their points has crashed. Our stance is really clear. We keep negotiating as a third party. We'll abolish any intervention, any attacks. We do not legitimize any killing, just like they've told you, so on and so forth, right? I'm going to talk about two things in my speech. Firstly, about culpability. Secondly, about effectivity. Firstly, is US culpable? We say yes, because those bombs dropping are just further escalating the problem in the end of the day. The rebuttals, they're actually there to destroy authoritarian regime. Why won't US destroy China then? But still, these arguments are actually justifying killing that they are trying to defend in the end of the day, right? Second response is that their intervention and the U.S. intervention is actually in Saudi is actually because of oil and weapons. This is also funny because Saudi does not have war in the end in the very first place, right? We have clearly picturized to you for years. U.S. have been dropping bombs, and that is just a waste of money, ladies and gentlemen. So we win that clash, right? Secondly, about effectivity, exactly. Radical approach has never been working in the current status quo. We need to stop, intervene, because there are too many casualties, and that is just under our hands, right? We want to try a totally different approach, which is a peaceful approach. There's no actual response from their side of the house. Why exactly negotiation will not come to an end in the end of the day? Why exactly their solution, which is very abstract, will actually create more peace with all the people, right? They also stated that this will create more casualties because we legitimize their action. We do not say anything about legitimizing people killing. We want to stop terrorism, and that can only happen in our side of the house. Proudly propose.
Okay, I thank the reply speaker from the proposition team. That also ends this entire debate. Congratulations for finishing.